Julia Kempton. This is the Stern Economic Development Group. I hope you all enjoyed your spring breaks, and here's the news for this week. This week's story is going to look at the impact of the Russian war in Ukraine on economies in Africa, and particularly on African agriculture. In this video, I'm going to reference some data points compiled by Nigerian journalist Nosmat Gabadamosi, so I want to credit her here before I get into the story. At the end of February, Russia launched an invasion of its democratic, independent neighbor, Ukraine, repeating its strategy from Chechnya and Syria and indiscriminately attacking civilians, killing thousands. In response, the United States, EU, and many of their allies announced significant global sanctions meant to fully isolate Russia from the global community. I hope to talk more about those sanctions in a future video, and I'm sure you've all been talking about it in your classes, in your private lives, and on the streets in New York. In the news segment for EDG, we often discuss humanitarian crises unfolding around the world. But this situation is unique for the resolve the United States has shown with respect to not just offering humanitarian aid, but sanctioning participants in the violence. If effective, hopefully the outpouring of support for the people of Ukraine will be a model for empathy and kindness in future refugee, defense, and economic policy. For now, there are a few more major ways that this war may affect Africa, including with regard to food security, oil prices, and Russian sanctions. In terms of food security, Ukraine is one of the world's big primary producers of grain products. In 2020, African countries imported $2.9 billion in agricultural products from Ukraine. Egypt, which is Russia's top trading partner in Africa, gets 85% of its grain from Ukraine and Russia. Ukrainian wheat exports have cratered for obvious reasons, and while technically wheat is not usually subject to foreign sanctions, constraints issued by the US, European Union, and others to punish Russia have impacted and will continue to impact supply chains in that country. So wheat from Russia, it is reasonable to expect, will also become more difficult to access in North Africa and beyond, driving up prices. Tunisia announced in the second week of the war that it would begin looking for new sources of wheat and food reserves. According to David Wright, the chief operating officer for the charity Save the Children International, 86% of Sudan's wheat imports are at risk after the Russian invasion of Ukraine because they are sourced from Russia or Ukraine. Similar numbers are applicable to humanitarian aid in food insecure regions of Ethiopia. So this past week, the African Development Bank announced a $1 billion fund to promote wheat production in Africa, assisting about 40 million farmers while making their operations more efficient and resilient to climate change. The fund will focus on wheat, rice, corn, and soybeans in an effort to offset agricultural imports halted because of the war in Ukraine. Wheat imports accounted for about 90% of Africa's $4 billion agricultural trade with Russia and almost half of its $4.5 billion trade with Ukraine last year. Next week, I'll follow up on how else the war in Ukraine will affect developing economies in Africa, including with respect to Russian foreign direct investment in Africa. Now, on to the meeting.